I welcome all of you to visit us whenever you can. So coming to the topic of today, but before that, I think I must also tell all of you that Dr. Ram Manohar and I studied in college at the same time. He was, though I looked 10 years senior to him, he was 10 years senior to me. Sorry, 1 year senior to me. He was the studious student, a seeker of the truth. I was the bad student, seeking a lot of things that were not anywhere near truth. He was a scholar, an academician, a scientist, a researcher, everything that I am not. Of course, along the way, after finishing college, we went our different ways. But it is around that time that I came across this little story, which is what really took me in the direction of Ayurveda after I completed the Ayurveda course. And that little story is about 3 types of Swarga. Swarga meaning heaven. There is the Indra Loka, Vishnu Loka and Shiva Loka. Indra, Vishnu and Shiva. 3 gods. Indra, as you know, is the king of gods. Vishnu is the sustainer and Shiva is the destroyer. So Swarga, as in the Indra Loka, meant being very happy, of course, and fulfilling all of one's desires. Because Indra liked to fulfill, and he was not happy if anybody else took a step ahead of him. So if there was a saint who was meditating, he would send a beautiful dancer to disturb the meditation. If there was a demon who was threatening to get ahead of Indra, he would find a way to vanquish the demon. So that is the Indra Loka, where everything was nice, everything was in sattva, but still the I was important. My desires were most important. The second is the Vishnu Loka. Vishnu with Lakshmi, representing abundance, representing prosperity. In that Loka, it was all about the we. It was not just about I being happy and content, but taking care of everybody who was not in the same space, looking after the needs, looking after the hunger of everybody out there. So the Vishnu Loka was more about the we. And then there was the third kind of heaven called Shiva, the Kailash mountain, for those of you who are familiar with the Kailash mountain. And Shiva Loka, Shiva was a happy family. You had Shiva, a half-naked Shiva with a serpent around his neck, with the Ganga or Ganges overflowing from his matted hair. You had Parvati sitting next to him and these 2 children, Ganapati and Kartikeya, sitting there. There was also a rat, there was a tiger. It was a very happy, content family of people and animals. The prey and the predator were all in harmony there. So that you had the snake and you had the rat, you had the peacock, everybody was there together in happiness. They had transcended even the we. The hunger no longer existed there, and so they did not need to prey on each other to satisfy their hunger. So you had Indra, where I was important, Vishnu, where the we was important, and Shiva, where transcending the we was what mattered. In contemporary terms, it would mean in the Indra Loka there was sattva, but it was still accompanied by a little bit of tamas. And that is why tamas always, sattva, rajas, tamas, I believe. All of you are familiar with it. So tamas is where the I dominates completely. And so while Sattva was there, the Tamas had not gone completely. In the Vishnu Loka, it was Sattva accompanied by a little bit of Rajas, because it was all action. I still needed to take care of others. I wanted to protect, look after everybody. And in the Shiva Loka, it was actually transcending the gunas. Sattva-tita, guna-tita, going beyond the gunas, which is when one is actually in a completely healthy, happy, content state of being, in a state of absolute nivritti. You're all students of yoga also, so probably you know the vrittis. You know the vrittis? And in Ayurveda we talk about pravritti and nivritti. Pravritti is the inclination in the direction of the vrittis, where we are in the action mode, and nivritti is where we are beyond the vrittis. We have conquered the vrittis. Vrittis as in waves in the ocean of the mind. A vritti is a wave. A vritti happens in avidya or ignorance. But it happens to conquer avidya, to move out of ignorance into absolute wisdom. And that wisdom is actually cloaked, it is veiled with tamas. There are layers and layers of tamas around the wisdom. And so the vrittis actually help to shake the layers and allow the wisdom to be revealed. So vrittis are not all bad. You have got the klishta vrittis and the aklishta vrittis. You've got the vrittis that create sorrow, and you have the vrittis that do not necessarily create sorrow. Like pramana is a vritti. Pramana is an instrument of knowledge, of knowing. It is not a vritti that creates a problem for you. So, as you keep looking at the vrittis, you will also see there is Vishaya Akara vritti and Brahmakara vritti. Vishayakara vritti is where if your mind is constantly obsessed with a particular object, whether it is the iPhone, which I believe is the most common source of obsession today, or with anything else, gradually the mind takes the shape of that iPhone and it does not think of anything else. The Brahmakara vritti is your mind is constantly focused on Brahman or the universal consciousness or the self. Then over a period of time, the mind will actually become one with Brahman. So in vrittis, you can decide whether you want to have a lower vritti where you identify with the lower object, or whether you identify with the universal consciousness. The lower vrittis are always in the rajas tamas state of mind, and the higher vrittis are always in the sattva state of mind. A common obsession today is food. We all of us, especially in treatment, when the patients who come to our center, through the 21 days that they are there, they would spend a majority of the time thinking about food. That is the Vishaya Akara vritti. Their mind virtually becomes the food that they are dreaming of. We had a patient who would come every day and tell us about, last night I dreamt of Toblerone, and the previous night I dreamt of Snickers, and every day she would describe her dreams of food very vividly. The more we get caught in the lower vrittis, the greater is the challenge in the healing process. Because it starts creating blocks. The mind is completely distracted from the healing process. But we'll come to that a little later. As we continue to think about the vrittis, there's another classification of vritti, which is where the first vritti is called manovritti, vritti of the mind, vritti in the state of rajas and tamas, an instinctive vritti, a vritti which is driven by rajas and tamas, which is the mind. The mind many a time reacts without thinking through an issue. When one is confronted with an event, it is easy to react rather than respond. So that is one vritti, manovritti. The next one is called buddhi vritti. Buddhi is the intellect, the discriminating intellect. It is a vritti of the vivekins, the ones who have actually acquired the capacity to discern between what is real and what is not real, what is right and what is wrong, what is good and bad, what is true and untrue in a given context. Developing the buddhi is not easy. Ayurveda will again give us, rather Ayurveda will direct us into the allied knowledge systems to understand how to develop the discriminating intellect. We must remember the first chapter of the Ashtanga Sangraha, when it talks about how to cleanse the mind, it just gives us one simple line. Dhi dhairyam atma vijnanam mano dosha aushadam param. The first being dhi or buddhi, the second is dhairya or fortitude, and the third is atma vijnanam or experience of the self. This is about all that the first chapter tells us about removing the doshas of the mind or cleansing the mind. Doshas of the mind as in rajas and tamas. So this buddhi vritti actually happens in a sattva state of mind. And so it is actually a good vritti. It is not such a bad vritti. And I keep making this distinction because many of us think of vrittis as always painful or negative or bad for us. So here buddhi is actually good, the ability to discern. So while it is still a wave in the ocean of the mind, it is not such a bad vritti. The next one is called sakshi vritti. Sakshi as in being a witness. Being a witness to the vrittis, to the waves that are happening in the mind. Now this is completely the sattva state of mind. There is no more any rajas and tamas. The ability to be in the witness mode, as told in the Bhagavad Gita, as told in many of our scriptures, the ability to observe everything that is happening in this body and mind. That is called the Sakshi Vritti. And the next Vritti is called Akhandakara Vritti, where one has now developed the capacity to actually become one with the universal consciousness. One is no longer seeing duality. The capacity to be one with the universal consciousness is possible in this state of vritti, and the final vritti is called ekarasa, where one is actually one with the universal consciousness. Now we don't need to go to all those areas, those are still too far ahead of us. But even if we can think of reaching the buddhi vritti, especially in the healing process, we do considerably well for ourselves as well as for the team, the healing team, the therapeutic team who is working with us. Because when the buddhi is functioning well, it becomes a little easier for us to share information with the Vaidya, with the physician, with the practitioner, without bringing our judgment into the process. How often we see patients who have studied a little bit of Ayurveda come to a practitioner and say, I think I have a Vata Pitta problem. Probably my Vata is 60 and my Pitta is 20. The Vaidya doesn't want to hear that. The physician wants to hear your symptoms and allow the physician or the practitioner to go through the process of understanding what is the disease causation process and then decide on the modalities of treatment. When the buddhi is functioning well, I will share information without bringing my biases and prejudices and judgments into the fray. But when my buddhi is not functioning well, then in the belief that I am helping the practitioner, I may actually tend to misguide the practitioner. So that is something that we need to be very aware of, because many a time meaning well patients tend to misdirect the practitioner. And this happens in all fields. I think I'm sure if there are any of our Western medicine colleagues here, they would also agree that Professor Google has made life a little more miserable for many of them, because in the desire to know more and in the desire to share the information that one knows, one is actually taking a step back sometimes, not always. I'm not saying that it is a regular feature, but many a time we do tend to take a step back. Ram Manohar this morning spoke about the need to be flexible. When you can eat any food, anytime, anywhere, provided your Agni Bala is good. And he put together this whole theory to support it. 30 years back, when we were in college and he was studious and I was not, I believed in flexibility. And he told me, don't be flexible, be a little rigid with your diet. I don't think he remembers it. 30 years later, he's teaching everybody to be flexible, which is nice. He sharpened the buddhi. There is this story of a man going to a woodcutter and requesting for help because he could not even earn his two meals a day. So the woodcutter gave him an axe and said, start cutting down the trees. So this man, in all his enthusiasm, began cutting the trees. He cut 18 trees on the first day and he was extremely happy. On the second day, he cut 15 trees and he was not so happy because it was 3 trees less. On the third day, it came down to 12. On the fourth day, it was 10. He went back to his boss and he was a little scared that he would lose his job. He said, I don't know what is happening. I can no longer cut down as many trees as I cut down on the first day. And the boss said, did you ever think of sharpening the axe while you were cutting the trees? You were so busy cutting the trees, you forgot to take care of the axe. You forgot to sharpen the axe. You forgot to work with the mind. This is a metaphor to help us to understand that many a time, as we project outwards, we forget to work with ourselves. We forget to work with the buddhi, sharpening the buddhi, sharpening the intellect. That is an ongoing process. It has to be a continuous process. We cannot even do without it for one day. And that is why the yoga text will keep talking about abhyasa and the Ayurveda text will keep using the word achara. Practice, practice, practice makes perfect. Without practice, nothing works. And so sometimes we don't even understand what we study, but the text say keep studying. Some of the language that we learn also, Sanskrit is not an easy language, and sometimes the words are not easy to understand. There was this boy who every day was made by his grandfather to do some chanting, and he got so fed up. He said, Grandpa, I don't understand anything of what I chant. Why do you make me chant it unnecessarily? Grandpa said, nothing to worry. Just take this cold basket and go and fetch some water from the nearby stream and bring it. The child said, are you mad? How can I bring water in a basket? Let me get it in a bucket. He says, no, get in the basket. So he goes and brings the water, and there's no water as expected. It all spills out. Grandpa says, again go and get the water in a basket. Again he goes, he comes back faster, again there's no water in the basket. He does this 3-4 times, he's starting to get upset, he's starting to regret that he asked his grandpa this question. Grandpa says, go one final time and come. So he goes and comes back, again there's no water. And he says, why did you make me engage in this unnecessary activity? Grandpa says, look at the basket, how clean it has become. Though nothing remained, no water remained in the basket has been cleaned of the coal. So sometimes we may not understand everything that we are studying, or everything that has been prescribed to us, or everything that a physician is telling us to do. But it is well worth the effort to follow it despite all the objections, because the end result is well worth the effort. So this buddhi vritti is something that we need to continuously work with. And when we talk about buddhi vritti, at a particular stage it becomes what is called the antarmukha vritti. A vritti that is directed inwards. You can have a bahirmukha vritti, vrittis that are externally engaged or externally focused, or you can have antarmukha vrittis that are focused on internal change, internal correction. And the manovrittis are in the external direction. Manovrittis are those which primarily connect with the external world through the senses and the sense objects. Buddhi vritti, sakshi vritti, etc. are antarmukha vrittis, which turn the focus inwards, turn the attention inwards, and these vrittis are available to us, as the texts say, only through achieving a very high level of vairagya. Vairagya as in detachment from the senses, detachment from the objects of the senses, detachment from the fruit of one's actions. This detachment is critical if one has to start focusing inwards. What has all this got to do with the patient? Or what has all this got to do with the healing process? Many a time, during the healing process, patients are extremely disturbed. It's very difficult for patients to have a reasonable level of faith and trust in the healing process. As many of you are practitioners, and you must be aware of how patients can be extremely obstinate about how they want to take the healing process forward. Many a time they think they know better than us. They know what is good for them. So many times the patients would have told you, I know my body better than you. I know my mind better than you. If you prescribe a diet, that diet will not work for me. You prescribe a medicine, oh, I know that this medicine doesn't work for me. We are constantly confronted with patients in a state of doubt, samshaya. Continuous doubt is what occupies the mind of most patients who go through any intense healing process. Now, cleansing of the mind is important for the patient. But here, cleansing of the mind is more important for the practitioner. When the session was labeled cleansing of mind in the healing process, I thought it is cleansing of mind of the patient. But later I realized it is actually first cleansing of mind of the practitioner. To be able to deal with a patient who is coming in such a disturbed state of mind and body. When the body is not functioning well, the mind is bound to be disturbed. Many a time, people or the support group around a patient will stress on the fact that the patient doesn't listen. It is only natural that the patient won't listen because the mind is confused. The mind is completely distracted by the pain in the body. The body takes the entire attention of the mind. The manovritti is in full flow, is in full functioning. And that being the case, how will the patient ever listen to you? many a time the practitioner also gets angry. Beyond a point, patience or tolerance is not a virtue today. Most of us have a huge problem being patient. There was this sadhu or saint who was taking a bath in a river, and there was a scorpion who was struggling in that water. So the sadhu decided to help that scorpion and carefully lifted the scorpion and was about to place the scorpion on the banks of the river. The scorpion stung the saint. And the saint jumped and the scorpion went back into the river. Again the sadhu went to help the scorpion. Again the scorpion stung, again went back into the river. This happened multiple times. The person who was watching thought that the saint was a fool. He said, don't you know that that scorpion will sting you? It is better to let that scorpion drown in the water. Why are you undergoing this pain? The saint replies, the scorpion's dharma is to sting. My dharma is to save, is to have compassion and to save. But then, you will be stunned. He says, as I go through this process, at a particular point, I will learn not to react so that the scorpion can still be placed on the banks, the scorpion can go along its way, and I would have also completed my dharma. This is what a practitioner would need to remember, because many a time practitioners, physicians become intolerant with the patients. It's very difficult to manage patients. I'm sure all of you must be aware. Patients can be extremely difficult, especially patients who are in a course of Panchakarma for anywhere between 3 to 5 weeks. The first week, everything is fine, the food is great, therapists are great, practitioners are great, everything is good. And then you start them on a ghee treatment, starting with 50 ml of medicated ghee on the first day, and put them on a very strict diet. By the third or the fourth day, they are ready to run away from there. They will shower you with the choicest of abuses. Everything is bad. Nothing is working. It's an extremely difficult situation. And that is where it is extremely important. We get wonderful suggestions from patients. On the fourth day of the ghee treatment, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the ghee treatment. On the fourth day of the ghee treatment is when patients give us wonderful suggestions about how the food can be better. A little bit of spice here, a little bit of ginger there, a little bit of cumin here. They give us such wonderful suggestions, and the physician has to learn to take it in through one ear and let it out through the other. Because one is learning to respond to the need of the patient, not the desire of the patient. And to be able to respond to the need of the patient, it is extremely, extremely important that one develops a high level of the buddhi vritti, the ability to discern between the need and the desire of the patient, and the ability to have a high level of patience, tolerance, and continue with the process without being misguided by the words that the patients express to the practitioner. So, cleansing of the mind starts with the practitioner and starts with regular practices. Whatever be a practice that you choose, whether it is yogasana practice or meditation or pranayama or silence or combination of tools, whatever be it, engaging in the same practice every day on a regular basis, when you are doing well, it's important to be able to develop this level of clarity, this level of patience, and this level of tolerance. But if our practices are changing every 10 days, then we are only hurting ourselves. in the modern world, we get bored of practices. Every 10 days, we need to find a new practice. We need to find a new learning, a new book. Everything has to change for us. Variety is the spice of life, we are taught. But a practice needs to be consistent, persistent. We have to be patient with the practice and work with it for many, many days and weeks and months and years. When Lord Indra, the king of gods, and Virochana, the king of the demons, one day together they went to Prajapati, to the father, and asked him, how do we know ourselves? They wanted to learn a little more. How do we know ourselves? So the father replies, what you see with your eyes in a mirror or in a reflection is yourself. So they go and look in water, and what they see is their bodies. So they decide that the body is the self, and both go happy. Virochana goes and teaches all his fellow colleagues, the demons, and they all get into taking care of the body extensively, exercising, getting a six-pack abdomen and everything. Indra goes halfway and pauses. He says that cannot be true. The body is temporary. It cannot be the self. And so he goes back to Prajapati. So Prajapati, the father, said, you have to spend another 32 years with me for me to give you a deeper answer. So they had already spent 32 years, both Indra and Virochana. They get the first answer as the body. Virochana continues on his way. He is happy. Indra comes back for another 32 years. After 32 years, he is told that in your dreams you will know yourself. Again, he is not satisfied with the answer. He is told to spend another 32 years, and he is told, sleep, deep sleep is when you will know yourself, your Atma, your real Atma, your Mukhya Atma. Again, he is not satisfied with that answer, and then after another 5 years, he is told, you are right. Your real self is the one who throws light on your body, your self, your sleep, your dreams, everything, that which illuminates. It took him 101 years to get that answer, which sounds very simple to all of us, but it's a little more complicated. I'm not going into the full details of that answer, but I just gave this example to show us the extent of practice that is required. 101 years it took for him to get that answer. We many a time are unable to spend 101 days in the same practice. How many times we move from one yoga studio to the next? How many times we move from one practitioner to the next? From one hospital to the next? From one diet to the next? We keep changing our practices all the time. Change of practice does not allow the buddhi, the discerning intellect, to work. Change of practice does not allow us to develop the kind of patience, the kind of tolerance that we need to have to be able to cleanse the mind consistently and persistently, whereby we are actually able to see a patient in absolute clarity and be very tolerant of all that the patient throws at us. And only when we are in that state of mind can we expect the patient also to cleanse their mind reasonably well, because they will be actually able to relate to the clarity of mind that we present to the patient. The patient is pretty good at identifying a confused mind. And many a time when a practitioner or a physician or a Vaidya presents a confused mind to the patient quickly picks on it. And the moment we present a confused mind, the patient is definitely not going to have a cleansed mind. So the practices begin with us. As we engage in practices, it is so much easier for the patient to also begin to understand the importance of a clean mind, a still mind, a stable mind, a persistent mind to go through the entire healing process. That is when a bitter medicine will be deemed as better medicine. Otherwise, a bitter medicine is always taken with a frown on the face. I'm sure, do you all take medicine with a frown on your face or a smile on your face? The Ayurveda medicines, I don't believe too many of us take it with a smile on our face. We think, we smell the bitterness, we see the bitterness before we taste the bitterness. And many a time we curse the bitterness before we consume the medicine, which is perhaps not the best way to consume the medicine. You want to be thinking positive about the medicine rather than thinking negative about the medicine. So to be able to, we have patients who, in our center, we serve the South Indian version of the khichdi. We call it kanji, rice kanji with green gram or mung beans, almost every day, and most patients get fed up with it. And many patients decide that they can never get used to the taste of this combination. But as they begin to see the benefit, the healing benefit, we have had patients come to us 3 to 4 years later and say that we have actually begun to like the taste of this kanji. People who had said we will never in our life ever get used to kanji and mung beans are starting to like it. Ayurveda tells us that we need to eat food that we like, that is appealing to the heart. It should be priyam, it should be hridyam. But what we many a time forget is that this mind can actually make a food taste good or bad depending on where it is. And so the stronger the mind, the cleaner the mind, the more determined the mind, the more convinced the mind is about a food, about a medicine, about a healing process, the more open it is to receiving it completely. So to conclude, in English we say the devil lies in the detail. In Ayurveda we say the devil lies in the practice. We can keep theorizing, we can keep talking, we can keep debating, we can keep intellectualizing, but we need to start somewhere. Unless we engage in some practice, it may be for 10 minutes a day, it may be for 20 minutes a day, it may be the Ayurveda Dinacharya, it may be the yoga practices, it may be the seasonal routines of Ayurveda, it can be any practice. But unless we make a determined effort to get into practices on a consistent, persistent basis, we will never be able to move into that state of mind where the rajas and tamas are less driving us and the sattva is actually driving us more. So that is why in the Lalita Sahasranamam, the 1,000 names of the goddess, there is this line which says Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti Swarupini. The goddess is the very embodiment of Ichha Shakti, or the power of intention, Jnana Shakti, or the power of wisdom, and Kriya Shakti, or the power of action. Unless all three work together, one cannot actually move forward in the healing process, whether one is a patient or a practitioner. A strong intention needs to be backed up by the wisdom about the intention and followed up with the right action. Many a time we engage we take in a lot of information without having the right intention or following up with the right action. And many of us engage in actions. We jump into the action mode without actually setting an intention or garnering the wisdom. Many a time politicians are a great example of all action without thought. All three are required. Power of intention, power of wisdom, and power of action. All three work together in a beautiful, harmonious way when we are continually engaged in practices and have increased the sattva in the mind. When we increase the sattva in the mind, we expand. We move into the we space. We started the session talking about the we. We need to move more into the we space. In English, the illness word transforms into wellness when you replace the I with the we. I don't know who coined these two words, but many a time we become too obsessed with the physical I, thereby actually letting go of wellness. The more we expand, the more we open, the more the channels are clear, the more there is flow within, there is movement within, we move into the space of an expanded we, and that is when we experience true wellness, happiness, and contentment. Thank you.
Okay. Can I have a question? Is there another question? So how do you determine that the practice actually works for you? Because there are many different practices and they're not always suiting the person's constitution spiritually or mentally or physically. And then you can get, you can go on a route of a very bad practice. So how do you determine that it's not your ego, for example, or whatever? How do you determine that the practice is actually working for you and it's not just the resistance of laziness, of the tamas that don't want to continue with the practice, but actually determine, no, that actually I'm not evolving in that kind of...
So unless or until we move into the sakshi or the witness mode, it is good to have a guide or a teacher or an acharya or a guru. Because it is very difficult for us to assess for ourselves whether we are on the right path. So that is where the presence of a teacher in your life, these days the word guru is used indiscriminately, so we won't use the word guru. But at least the presence of a guide or a teacher in your life who can keep evaluating you, who can keep evaluating your progress and supporting you through this journey is a good idea.
So how do you choose your guru? Or are they choosing you?
You set the intention, Ichha Shakti, power of intention. You set a strong intention and you start some small practices. When the teacher is meant to be in your life, he or she will be there. And you can have multiple teachers. In Ayurveda or in the Vedas, the whole world is your guru. But one needs to be open enough to receive. So initially, while you may need a physical guru, there can come a time when you go beyond the physical guru. But for all this, patience is required.
But I'm not formulating it very well, so I'll give it a go. How does emotion fit with vritti? If you have emotion coming up from the inside through the channel of the mind, how does it sit with manas, Buddha?
So that would primarily be in the first stage, the manovrittis. Emotion expressed at an event is generally fine. But when that emotion persists long after the event is over, then you know that we have got stuck in the tamas rajas space. When we remember an event that happened 20 years back and feel emotional, that is not good for us. But at the actual event, if we express an emotion, whether it is grief or anger or whatever, in whatever way we need to, we express it and move forward, that is generally fine, as long as it is not violently expressed, of course. But yeah, otherwise, emotion is always at the manovritti level.
At the Vajrayana, you explained already about how it's important for the practitioner, the doctor, to have this cleansed mind to help the patient. But what, in addition, do you offer or advise the patients that you see to help them in this area?
So because generally patients come with a return ticket booked, we have very little time to work with patients, and they come with very specific issues, many a time physical issues. So the work with the mind has to be mostly indirect, because there is not enough time, you cannot do too much of work at the same time. But what we have done is, we have these morning and evening prayers, 1 hour sessions which are led by the doctors and the patients together. We have group sessions where patients and doctors sit together. Patients ask questions, different kinds of questions, and the doctors attempt to answer them. Many a time, the answer reaches not the person who has asked it, but reaches somebody else who did not voice it. Because everybody's mind is racing. And especially during the treatment, the mind is, while we keep talking about moving into a space of rest, physical rest, mental rest, it is not easy during the treatment, and not just during the treatment. When one is unwell, that is when the mind is racing all the more, and one is constantly evaluating, is this working? On the second day of treatment, so many patients tell us, I don't think the treatment is working. They've hardly had 1 dose of medicine and 1 abhyanga, and they say the treatment is not working. It's not their fault. The expectation levels are so high, and because this mind is so confused, is so much in this Rajastama space, people expect to see results overnight. So we have to be very patient, and we have to work indirectly most of the time, unless a patient is coming specifically for the mind. Where they come for the body issues, we have to work indirectly with the mind, which we do primarily through what we call satsangs or discussion sessions like this, and prayer sessions, and a lot of breathing also. We have yoga students who come for the treatment there, and they want to do their asana practice during the treatment. And we say, you have to take complete rest. But can we do asana practice? So we say no. They say yoga is a sister science of Ayurveda. Why can't we do asana practice? We'll get double benefit, Ayurveda and yoga together. But then we have to say too much of a good thing is not necessarily good. Honey is good, hot water is good. Honey and hot water together need not necessarily be good. So that is a confused mind, and we have to work patiently with that mind.
I'll just add a personal note that I think I would say that the prayers times that you get at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening are just extremely powerful and have such a strong effect in the mind. It may sound like a very simple thing to do, but just that on its own, I have seen that create such an amazing momentum when you're undergoing the treatment, because it really connects you, it connects your mind, it really, and the fact that the doctors are there doing the prayers and that everybody is sharing that healing moment, I think that is a brilliant offering that Vajrayana is very unique for. Nobody else does this, and I have fully appreciated that, and I would say that it's a brilliant way for us to help the mind. Yeah. If it's like an energy field. It's a very, very strong energy field that radiates through the whole complex. And yeah, it allows us to get to that level of sattva.
It is. It's really, really special because the temple is at the center of the hospital, and there is that there is a priest at the entrance that's praying all day for your well-being, and it's really powerful resonance. Plus, then you have loads of amazing teachers, so it's really phenomenal experience on that level. That there's not only there's somebody praying for your well-being. It's very, very amazing. It's powerful too.
I just have a question about the research aspect on Panchakarma, because on PubMed, the database of scientific papers, there's only about 2 studies I could find, and one of them called it Panchakarma. It was actually 5 days of yoga and meditation. I don't even know how they called that Panchakarma. But are you involved in any research, or might be, or I think Maharishi's done some, but there's just not much research out there on before and after effects of Panchakarma.
I am not into the research field. You have Namunor out there. You should ask him. Vaidigrama is still very young, and right now we are creating this model where we are trying to extend the entire thought process of whether it's the patients or the staff, everybody, into the we space, which means including the surrounding community, including the villagers, helping people to think beyond themselves. Because many a time when we are unwell, we believe that there's nobody in this world who's suffering more than me. And whether it's a very simple problem or a very complicated problem, my problem is always the worst problem. And it sometimes helps people to go beyond themselves and see that probably we are more fortunate than many others who are in much deeper spaces of ill health and grief. So we are not ready to go into research right now. We are still building, we are still in very early days of Vaidigram. We have probably done only around 10 to 20% of where we want to go. So that is not a space that we would be entering anytime soon. So I'm sorry.
Do you think Sattva-guna and Aguna, they are related?
Well, I think improving sattva in ourselves is the first priority.
Yeah. Okay, so
And as you work with yourself, that sattva will get translated to your patient, because then you will be able to put the patient also into small practices. Our biggest challenge is that many a time we are not working with ourselves, and that is why I consciously spoke about antarmukha vritti. Because the more you work with yourself, the more it translates into work with the patient. When one is in pain, it is not easy to develop sattva. So, one has to be able to develop sattva for oneself, help the other person indirectly till the pain is relieved to some level before one can actually look at working with the mind and thereby help the body. So I think I will stop now. Thank you very much.